So you join us at the end at late past late on the day, the opening day of not just the sevens in the Olympics, but the Olympics in general. The Olympics hasn't started yet.
We're in the pre-Olympics.
Rugby is here. Rugby has taken over Paris, and it's gone, you know what, Paris? Shut up, we're back. You thought you had enough of us after the World Cup last year? Precisely after the quarterfinals? No way, indeed, to Jose. So we've had the first day of the Olympic Sevens. It's been, I think, a pretty good day. There's been no big shocks or upsets, but I think the quality of rugby has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. We were saying the day's absolutely flown by. You know, we just watched like 6.5 hours of rugby, and it's barely registered that it's been that long.
And I say this as an enjoyer of rugby sevens, right? Usually when you watch a full day of rugby sevens, there's at least one or two games where you slightly zone out.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is, you know, it's not as much for me as the rest of them are. There's not really a game that stands out as that.
Yeah.
There were some games that were significantly better than others, which we'll come on to. But the day's been really enjoyable. I think every game has had its USP, as it were.
Yes. And I think that's been the thing, right? That one of the great things they've done in scheduling a sevens tournament is normally games and sevens kick off at like 12 minutes past 9, you know, and the next game will kick off 14 minutes later. And one game finishes, the next game starts 1 minute later. Yeah. And actually there being about 10 minutes between games has helped this feel like an occasion, help you digest and talk about each game and kind of process each game and talk about them. It's had to feel like an occasion, and it's also kind of meant it's flown by quicker because you're not thrown, you don't have a kind of whiplash from going one game to the next.
Yeah.
You had a moment to go like, okay, that was cool. I've got a moment to go to the toilet, make a cup of tea. You know, we popped the chippy in between two games and then go on to the next one. I think it's really worked as a format. I think we've got a really, really solid quality of rugby.
Yeah.
And I think universally, from reactions around social media, the general media, and from us in this room alongside Billy Twelvetrees, really, really enjoyed the day.
Yeah. And I think that for your standard, you know, your Hong Kong sevens, your Twickenham sevens or whatever, having that really helter-skelter style of scheduling really works, right? Because that is more about fancy dress, getting a load of beers down you, being with your mates, whatever, the occasion that is going to the sevens, right? And that is great that you've always got top-class rugby in front of you. But for something like this for the Olympics, I really like it. There's a different vibe to it.
Yeah.
And I think that translates towards the rugby itself, because across the day, I think it's been quite low scoring.
That's it. If there's one trend over this seven so far, it's how low scoring it's been.
Yeah.
There've been a handful of games where one team's run away with it, you know, most notably New Zealand against Japan and Fiji against the USA. But there's been no nillings, and generally it's been Argentina against Kenya as well in the end. But generally it's been pretty low scoring, especially once we got to half time. We've never had a game that's already out of sight. I'd be interested to compare in the coming days and weeks beyond how this differs from the World Series as an average scoreline, because it's come down enormously. And so by the end of the day, when we're getting to that kind of 17-5 game between New Zealand and South Africa, the last game of the day, that didn't feel like a big event. That was quite low scoring.
Yeah, and I think that's partly testament to just the quality of teams that we have. I think there are a couple of teams that you look at and you go, unfortunately, they're just below the standard that's required of them here. But they have played well as individuals and as a team.
I think every team has played well.
Yeah.
Every team has looked really fired up.
Yeah.
And so I think you can make an argument that Uruguay, Japan, and to an extent Kenya look like they're from a lower tier.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tell they've been playing, Japan have been playing the Challenger Series instead of the World Series. And yet they have thrown absolutely everything at every game. I love the way Japan have played, for instance. They've been my favourite team to watch over today. And I was really looking forward to watching them, each time they came around. And they've approached it in a really different way. And yet you can tell they haven't been playing this level of opposition for the whole season.
They've done everything that's asked them, right? And unfortunately, that does mean that oppositions have run away from them, right? But they've been really fun to watch. They've scored some great tries, largely through kicking over the top, which isn't usually the tactic in sevens that a lot of teams refer to. But again, similar to 15-a-side, actually, if you're really good at retaining the ball, and this isn't necessarily just in the breakdown, but just keeping the ball alive, that will mean that you're defending against a solid seven all the time, and will open up the space in behind.
This is the great thing about this day, right? People say, we've had a bit of everything in the sevens. We've had 2 box kicks, both from Japan.
Yeah. And I'm really impressed with Joshua Karevi,
Yes.
for example, in the midfield for them. Well, he's been playing up front for them, but he's Simon Karevi's brother.
Yeah.
And you can see the genes passing over, right?
Yeah.
Both facially and just in terms of the skill set. Puts in a lovely kick for their first try of the day. He's not managed to last the full 14 minutes for either of the games, but when he has been on, he's been really, really good. And I really like the skill set. Good ball carrier as well, just an all-round good sevens forward.
The thing that stood out to me about Japan is Simon Amor, the
Yeah.
coach, who obviously has coached a bunch of 7 teams in the past, most notably England.
Yeah.
Did you coach his team GB?
Yeah.
And did a fantastic job with both of them.
Yeah.
And in that, he created a style of play around the players he had. And that's always been his thing. Kind of the thing Warren Gatlin's talked about in past in 15s, of looking to create a style that suits the players.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen much of his Japan team because, them having not been in the World Series generally. And so, actually, what we've seen is he has done the same thing Eddie Jones did in 2015, right? Of building a style where they are working out to touch lines and they're happy to take rucks on wide positions where they can clear out one man, at most two, and then spread the other way.
Yeah.
And they've looked really good on ball retention. And it's not in the same way an Ireland team or even Kenya have in terms of controlling possession, but they've looked to quickly use rucks to suck people in.
Yeah. And even without rucks, they're still quite good at that. And again, this is why I firmly believe that this Japanese team, if given more exposure to the level of rugby they're playing at this weekend, will actually survive. Because if you look at Ireland, if you look at Argentina, if you look at Fiji, if you look at New Zealand, if you look at how these guys play, they don't need a breakdown to set a move off, right? No. They need a winger to stop, chill, look in front of them, get somebody to run a hard line, somebody to drop 20 metres deeper and restart the attack there. Because it's not as territorial, you can just go from there. And Japan have actually managed that a handful of times, not as quickly or as efficiently as the teams I've just mentioned, but the fact that they have the skill set and the awareness to do that is actually a really positive sign for them.
Yeah, so Amor's been in position in Japan for 2 years, right? And we can see a team here who have settled into a game plan, have a style of play, and yet there is still room to go, as you say. Like, you can see where the next evolution of this team is. And I hope he gets more time beyond this Olympics, even though perhaps they're not going to leave with the best results. They're currently got the worst points difference of any team. But there is an awful lot to take away from this. They haven't rolled over and died in any game. And they've kept fighting throughout. And I think the way they played against New Zealand was bold in that they didn't go, well, we're going to play our normal game or the way people normally play against New Zealand. They've gone to take risks and do different things and kick far more. And I like that. I like that a lot.
You're not going to beat New Zealand without trying to stretch them, are you?
No.
And sometimes that means you have to give them counter-attack opportunities. And you know what? They'll score off it. So be it.
Yeah. So, the first game of the day between Australia and Samoa. We're going to pick up on those. We're going to go team by team, kind of work through each of the sides that are played today in the men's tournament. So, we've covered Japan. Australia, I think, started really roughly. They've got an unbelievable level of talent and they are well put together as a side. They're kind of a dark horse for a medal.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that. We saw perhaps why they're not considered one of the favourites, because Samoa really took it in that first game and they had to kind of struggle through and scrape home in the end.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate there, though.
Yeah.
Because they did come through that.
That's it.
And
yeah.
Samoa, that was them at the, I don't want to say the top of their game, because I'd love them to prove that wrong. And in sevens, that will always be the case. You're never at the top of your game, because it's such an unpredictable sport. But Australia, on the other hand, are, as you say, I think your point about them being well put together is perfect. They've got a pack of players who will retain the ball from the kickoff, who will win their set pieces. Yeah. They've got a set of, I want to say, halfbacks who will distribute the ball well and control the game well. And they've got some absolute gas out wide, right? Yeah. That's a perfect sevens team in a way. And they're all fit enough that they managed to break down Samoa playing that well. Yeah. And being that aggressive and physical. And Samoa were brilliant in that game. Defensively outstanding. Didn't lose their cool in the first half. I think that a lot of the time the temptation is to try and really catch people back and put big shots on them and stuff. They didn't do that. And that's, I think, when it comes to teams like Samoa, that's something they've potentially been guilty of before. Yeah. But against a team like Australia, who are so, as you say, well put together, they didn't lose their cool. No. It was just, Australia are used to a level higher than that. They're way fitter than them.
I think that's it. That's the thing that stands out about this Australia team, right? Is they looked broadly composed and things weren't clicking over that first half of either game. You know, they scored the try really early on against Kenya and then spent the rest of that second half, or the rest of that first half rather, looking rather frustrated and things weren't quite clicking. And yet in both games they're so fit and they are executing flawlessly the same ideas right through to the 80th minute. Yeah. And I'd be really interested to see how they go against...
14th minute.
What did I say?
80th.
80th. Force of habit. Force of habit dies
I would
hard.
hate that. Sevens is hard enough as it is.
Bloody Starmer called Rishi Sunak the Prime Minister the other day. Like, it's not the biggest gaffe of the day through force of habit. So, yeah, they have continued playing the same accuracy and the same style through to the 14th minute, plus added time.
Yeah.
And they look, to me, next to Argentina and maybe New Zealand, the fittest team in the competition.
Yeah.
They are the team who drop the least as they get tired.
That's when you can tell how good a Sevens team is.
Yeah.
It's how good they are in the point where the game is hardest, you know. That's where teams will improve the most is, you know, how quickly can they get tired and how quickly can they still execute things, you know. That's where you can truly measure a team. And also, can we talk Corey Toole?
Yes.
He is jets, man.
Yeah.
And a lot of the talk has been about Mark Nwankiti-Tawase, and rightfully so, because he's unbelievable.
Their best player at the World Cup last year.
Absolutely.
Rob Valentini wasn't going to make the Sevens team.
Yeah. But Corey Toole is duck to water here, right? Yeah. Unbelievably quick, so balanced, and has the skill set to back it up.
Yeah.
I think he is one of those players with the bullshit factor to just rip up this tournament.
Yeah. And likewise, having then Henry Hutchinson's kind of, as their all-time top point scorer, as their big name, has kind of slid away a bit into the shadows.
Yeah.
And is perhaps less talked about, and yet comes through with critical tries in both games. And looks, or, you know, critical involvement in both games. Critical try against Samoa. And has kind of taken to a backseat role really nicely, in that he is doing the thing that great 15s wingers do, where when they get a chance, they pounce. And he's been quieter than you'd expect. Like, he's not necessarily had all the ball, but once he's had it, he's taken chances every single time.
He's the talisman of this team, easily. I tweeted about this earlier, but he's the James Stannard in this team now. Like, he's the glue, right? And you refer to him as like a finishing winger. He can be that, but also he can just be the guy who makes the correct decisions because he's so experienced.
Word as well for Maurice Longbottom, the stupidest name in this competition. And there's some stupid names in this competition. And I think as a glue player, as you say, he's been superb.
He's one of the most consistent just distributors of the ball, right? And that's not just down to his passing, that is down to them being able to straighten up and just fire up an attack again, right?
Absolutely.
Really rate Maurice Longbottom. He's going to have a massive part to play for them.
Absolutely. Samoa, to touch on them, because you talked about them a bit already, Brian Lima's come in and they play like Brian Lima, right? Like, they are physical, they are ruthless, they are opportunistic. When they get a chance, they take it.
Yeah.
So we saw the intercept for Opetai early on. They are brilliant at just always staying in games. They defensively are so fired up, and it becomes a cliche about Samoa, and yet it feels very, very true. They have been so good at both scramble D and pushing Australia back, and it hasn't necessarily translated into wins because they played two incredibly tough fixtures. But I think there is raw materials in this team, and I'd be excited to see what Brian Lima can do with it in terms of pushing them forwards.
They're a tough team to play against, aren't they?
Yeah.
You're going to have to be, not necessarily at your best, but you have to be at least a 7 out of 10 to beat Samoa.
Yeah.
And at some point, they will play against a team who isn't infinitely fitter than them.
Yes.
Right? And that is where teams are going to struggle against them. Because as you say, getting a big hit against you and having to get back on your feet, you know, obviously in rugby sevens, you're having to run 100 metres at a time rather than in 15s where you're running 7 or 8 metres at a time sometimes, depending on what position you play, obviously. But the hardest bit about rugby is getting off the floor.
Yes.
When you've hit a breakdown or you've been hit or you've made a tackle, right?
Yeah.
And they will double the amount of times you have to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's like Samoa have a really long and proud history in sevens. It's been largely forgotten and largely wiped away over the last decade. And it's good to see a Samoa team that look back to it a bit, you know?
Yeah.
They still need to add Pessamino. They need Pessamino back.
Bring back Sevilii.
Yeah, fans of Samoan rugby in the late noughties, like, man, Pessamino, Sevilii.
I'm a Lolo Louis stan.
Lolo Louis, man. What a player.
Yeah.
What a player.
But anyway, 2024.
Yeah, 2024. So we then had Argentina against Kenya, right?
Yeah.
And I think this was one of the most interesting games of the day because Argentina go into the tournament as favourites. They are the bookies' favourites. They won the World Series and they're looking pretty good. And in the end, they came good. However, in the first half, I think we saw Kenya lay down a bit of a blueprint to beat them.
Yeah. they showed that they are human, right? Which is a lot from this Argentina team. Ojwang's try early on,
mate,
absolutely outstanding. Little hitch kick on the outside,
sheer pace,
absolutely fantastic. I want to just quickly talk about Kenya because I think the role that they played in this game was fantastic. Both games was fantastic. Kenya are a team who are massively on a rebuild at the moment. With obviously a few years back, they had Collins and Jura retire. Obviously, they've moved on from that, but also, can you ever move on from Collins and Jura? I haven't. You haven't. Humphrey Kayangi's also moved on. Billy Odiambo's moved on. These are all the key players that they've had in their team.
The core names.
Nelson
Oyu, man.
Like, they've lost so many of their key players over the last few years.
The players who, when you think of Kenyan rugby, never mind Kenyan sevens, you think of. Yeah. They're the first names that come to mind. And there has been a struggle for Kenya the last few years because I think a lot of those guys went largely all at once, over the course of like maybe 2 years at most. And they brought in a younger team, they brought them through, and they're now starting to come good. And so we've seen them rebuild, they go back on the core program next year, and that's hugely exciting for this team rebuilding into this. And also, on a broader Kenyan note, having a shot at an extra spot at the 2024 World Cup as well. A lot of these players do transfer back and forth.
Yeah.
And really exciting to see these players getting this exposure to this level. And I'm excited to see, this almost feels, and even though the Olympics is the pinnacle of sevens, it feels like a building block for them to work towards the next World Series and then potentially looking at, a bronze, silver, fingers crossed beyond that, in the following World Cup. This feels like the first tournament where they build on further beyond that.
The thing you'll always get with Kenya is they'll always be physical sprinters, right? There will always be big, fast men who can hit, who can sprint, right? But the guys in the middle are what make it for me, You've got Vincent Anyala captaining them, who's fantastic. His offloading game is otherworldly. I think he's, again, to use that cliche, the glue of this team, right? And a player who my current obsession...
Can we say it at the same time?
Vincent Adongo Akongo. Patrick Adongo Akongo. Mate, what a player. The best name in this competition.
The best name.
Again, silky skills. His kicking is fantastic. His passing of the ball is brilliant. Really good, just straighten of the line, tackle breaker, line breaker.
He's got that rare thing, right? And it's rare that someone of his size and pace has this, where he's got time on the ball.
Yeah.
The best playmakers who have that attribute are normally players who are perhaps slower, a guy like Gavin Henson, Dan Carter, figure who glide over the grass, and we see that all the time in sevens. Like Cecil Africa had a quick turn of pace, but he didn't necessarily move quickly off the mark, He had to almost decide to accelerate.
Sure.
And Pessamino, another great example, to bring him back up. What we're seeing with Adongo Akongo is a player who has that top end speed immediately, who also has the time on the ball to make decisions. And there's a few times we saw him like dropping off passes, floating around and involving himself again, and then accelerating.
Yeah.
And that kind of like playmaking in sevens is rare with the physicality that he brings as well as the pace. I think he was one of the standards the entire day for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But obviously on the flip side of that, we'll talk about how good Kenya are, right? Argentina.
Yes.
Okay. So again, similar to what we were just saying about Australia, they had the resolve to just come out and just get the job done, right? And the thing is, Argentina for me look like maybe they're living up to their favourites tag so far. They look like one of the best teams. And I don't think they're out of second or third gear yet, which is what we've said about Fiji in 2016 and 2020 Olympics, right? So they're in a really good position right now where it doesn't feel like they've peaked too soon.
However, I think that first half was really interesting for Argentina because the really interesting thing about Argentina's first game against Kenya, much more so than the Samoa game where they were broadly dominant the entire game, even though they scored fewer points in the end, was that Kenya kept that game pretty even and kept themselves in it by controlling possession incredibly well.
Yeah.
And so what we saw is Argentina love to attack the breakdown. This is one of the kind of key things they bring, is they are so big on assaulting the ruck every phase and chucking people in. And they're not like, we saw the USA and Ireland both try this where they'll chuck lots of numbers in. They're not like that. They have someone on their feet and contesting every single phase. Yeah. And it's normally only one or two, but they're attacking every breakdown, right? And what that became against Kenya was Kenya's ball retention over both games has been phenomenal. They are really quick and they're really quick into position. And as you say, because they've got such physically gifted athletes, they're able to clear out and stick there really easily. And Argentina in that first half gave away so many penalties, and it was backing up penalty on penalty on penalty, leading to Kenyan tries. And that becomes a really interesting weakness for Argentina in a tournament where they've broadly looked very good, is if an opposition can control possession against them, their discipline starts to slip because they want the ball back. They want to be challenging every ruck. And if you look at a team like Ireland, who are, again, like maybe contenders of the bronze medal or silver medal, you know, they're not favourites for gold.
You never know.
But they're medal contenders and they're a good enough team to be challenging up there. Or New Zealand likewise. And if they can look at that and go, okay, we control possession, we can force Argentina into penalties.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting kind of almost weakness they've shown. France likewise could do it. All the other medal contenders are good enough teams at controlling possession that if they can take that away from Argentina, who are so good when they get the ball and so good at just looking up and like, no one makes ground off like a evenly matched up overlap like them, you know, not overlap. Like if it's 3-on-3, Argentina are so good at just making ground, just playing it as almost very conventional, like hands down the line. Like I said this while we were watching it, but like that George Ford clip of him on Love of Rugby, talking about how we need the backs to be engaging defenders if it's 3-on-3, just knows to make ground. And Argentina do that so well. They're maybe the best at it, this Argentine Sevens team. And I think they look really impressive, but there is like a weakness there that I thought was very interesting considering they're the tournament favourites.
But again, I'm going to play devil's advocate once again.
Please do.
Because where it eventually paid off for them is their transition from defence to attack is probably better than any other team in this tournament. Other than Fiji.
Other than Fiji. But that goes for everything in sevens, other than Fiji.
But eventually it just comes down to the unpredictable nature of this sport that we love, right? Especially in sevens version. But the thing is, once they do eventually get that ball from you, they are so much kind of like fitter and ready to go that if you've attacked them for 10 phases and you don't manage to keep the ball, you are gone, right? Yeah. And then you're suddenly looking at somebody running half the length of the field. But the other thing that strikes me for Argentina, I think they have the deepest squad in this tournament. I think they have the most players that they can bring off the bench. We're looking at Herman Schultz they're bringing on off the bench. We're looking at Gaston Rival that they're bringing off the bench. Two of the most experienced players in this whole tournament. And of course, we can't not talk about him, Speedy Gonzalez, with his peroxide hair, who's come on, and I don't think he's passed the ball once, but he is absolutely rapid.
He's brilliant. I love watching him. He gives massive biggest prick you've ever met in your life vibes.
Oh yeah.
Like he is the guy in your group of friends who everyone secretly hates.
Yeah.
And yet he is always.
That's a good thing for a winger though.
Yeah. So the him scoring a try and pointing to his initials which he has tattooed on his arm was a peak, with his peroxide blonde hair, was a peak moment of, God, I hate you, but I'm compelled by you.
Think of all the people we're going to see like break down into tears when they achieve something in the Olympics in the next few weeks. And there he is with his initials on his chest, on his arm. Good for him.
Oh yeah.
Good for him.
He might as well get the dog's bollocks tattooed next to them, because that's where he is. So let's move on from Argentina.
Yeah.
The other pool, so we've covered that pool, we've covered Pool B for some reason. And let's look at the host team's pool, right? So we have head of this pool, top seed in it, Fiji.
Yeah. They're on their bullshit, man.
They were probably the most impressive team of the day, which to say, we have spent the last few years going, are Fiji past it? Yeah. Is this power over? Is this gone? The Fijian government, bizarrely, though not bizarrely because it's Pacific Islands, we hear about this sort of shit all the time, stepped in and wanted Osaya Kalinisau put in as head coach. So he was installed, a few months back?
Yeah.
And
he's considered royalty in Fiji, by the way.
He was captain in 2016 when they won that first gold medal. Their first
he was the flag bearer
ever.
As well.
He is one of their most famous athletes of all time.
Yeah.
Maybe next to Sarevi, probably next down from Sarevi. Somehow above Nicky Little. I don't get it.
Justice for Deacon Marnie, man.
He's on banknotes, is that level of famous and successful. And they put him in, and he has broadly done what Ben Ryan did, but not in the way like when Gareth Baber came in and was like, you know what that Ginger Lad was doing? Just do that again.
Yeah.
Right?
Seems to be off those, really good work, lads. Well done. Keep doing that.
Just as you were is the game plan.
Yeah.
Just keep going. Just Liam Gallagher gave the team
The
talk.
greatest substitute teacher ever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Where Kalinisaw has come in and kind of gone, you know what, actually? What if we did that again? But I'm Fijian.
Yeah.
And he is kind of, I think, emphasised and underlined the right points.
Like he can demo the offload in training.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's the
He's got to
difference.
tell them how to do it. And it'll be interesting how they progress in the knockouts.
Yeah.
Because that will be a different style of rugby. And obviously they've come up against perhaps... Uruguay weren't the highest standard of opposition that they'll come up against this tournament, though they've been fantastic and really fiery, and I've really enjoyed watching them. The USA, though, are a very good team, are a team that was pretty much nailed on to make the quarterfinals, and yet they made them look like chumps, like actual tiny chumps of child.
In previous,
and Perry Baker is also there.
In previous Olympics, we've spoken about the likes of Mata, the likes of Nakarawa, Tuisova and Drandra, whatever, right? Arise Nandhuku.
Nandhuku, man.
He is absolutely the bollocks, right?
Yes.
When it comes to deciding...
I think this is the most times the word bollocks has been used in a rugby analysis show.
I think it is, and I'm happy to continue that trend.
Yeah.
Look, I think that when it comes to picking who you think is going to medal in a 15-a-side like World Cup, for instance, you start to look to who has the best game managers in their team and who has the best pack, right? Who's got the scrum that's going to put, your Handre Pollards into positions to kick points from 50-odd yards, right? That is essentially what it boils down to when you're picking like who's going to win knockout games. Whereas in sevens in the Olympics, I think the thing you want to look at, right, is something that is a factor in the 15-a-side game, maybe about a 10% factor, whereas it's more of a 50 to 60% factor here, which is the bullshit factor.
The bullshit factor.
Because when you look at, and I'm perhaps jumping ahead a little bit here, but when you look at each team, which players have the bullshit factor, right? And you're looking at Nandhuku for Fiji. You're looking at, we mentioned Corey Toole before. We're looking at Rokalasoa for New Zealand. We're looking at Dupont for France. There are so many players that you look at, and it's like, which of these teams has the most of those?
We didn't really mention him, but Paul Scanlon for Samoa as well, I think has the bullshit factor.
Yeah.
I think he's been phenomenal.
He has. And there's so many players in this Fiji team who you look at and they have that, right? It's not just him. Untemba has been outstanding all day. His support lines, his reading of the game is outstanding. Just one of those players that's completely effortless in how he plays.
Yeah.
And Ravantamanda has really stepped up.
I've really enjoyed Ravantamanda coming into sevens. Hasn't played much sevens for a very long time.
Yeah.
Has come in as a 15 specialist and plays a bit like a 15 specialist. And actually that's given Fiji a different dimension in how they play, in that they've got this lad who will just smash it up, And there's a few times when Fiji are doing their thing where they're lobbing it around and they're going wide to wide and they're doing lots of offloads. And some teams, it wasn't that it's been figured out, but there's been almost a decade of them doing this, and time for people to work out how do we attack this, how do we slow this down, how do we prevent those offloads, and actually having a guy who can stay on his feet and fight for yardage and make yardage himself without thinking of the offload, securing the ball, recycling it, and then playing away and being able to do that on the far wing is a really, really useful plan B. And Fiji have been all plan A because they haven't needed the plan B ever, until the last couple of years when they've had to bring in Kalinisaw. But I think Ravantamanda gives them that option, which I think is really useful in the lack of, it's a version of the sport where you don't need a kicking game. To have someone to just come in and be physical has been really, really useful. It's a really interesting option.
Yeah, I think that legally it should be counted as cheating because each of his limbs counts as a person, I think.
Yes.
Because they're all ludicrously strong.
Josh Adams smashed 4 people in the World Cup.
That is true. That's his claim to fame when he looks at this Olympics. Like, I once nailed that guy and made his arse hang out. And he's probably the only person who's ever done that because he's ridiculous. And as I say, the amount of people who have just hung off a limb of his. Yeah. And you've gone like, oh, he stood still. That's fine. They finally got him to ground. Oh, wait, no, he shook him off
he's still going.
with his boots.
Still going.
That guy's ridiculous. And he's been a great addition to Fiji.
Yeah.
Really bold and brave call to pick him. And it's paying off
Put him straight in and gives him as much game time as they have as well. Yeah. Without basically any time in the World Series. Yeah. So, huge, huge.
And it backfired before with Jared Hayne. However... different story.
Haven't even mentioned Jerry 2-0 once. That's the strength and depth they've got.
Oh my God.
So let's move on to France.
Yeah, let's do it.
The home nation, second seed in this pool, and a team boasting a lad called, and I just want to check the name properly to make sure I get this right, Theo Fauna. No, Antoine Dupont, the man himself, the boy, the star of this tournament, the star of rugby union in general, and a guy who I think is, if anything, underrated and underhyped.
Yeah, it's mad that.
And I think the first question isn't how do you think France have played, but how do you think Dupont has played?
Okay, we'll start with that. So the first half of the first game against the US, he made a couple of mistakes, which by Dupont's
this is it. You were saying
incredible
he had quite a poor
standards.
half. I think he had a perfectly okay half. Just he is Antoine Dupont. You judge him differently.
Yeah, and he passed one ball that went into touch, and it's like, oh my god, this guy's shit. He gave away a penalty, and it's just like, dude, what are you playing at? And then he did one clear out, which was okay rather than completely dominant. And it's like, this is the worst game of his career, lads. And then he comes up, he throws that ludicrous out the back offload, which sadly wasn't finished. Throws another lovely offload, which was finished.
Through,
yeah, and then in game 2, he stepped up. He scored his try, made a couple of great breaks, made an exceptional try-saving tackle and turnover. And yeah, he's warming up, he's cooking.
Yeah. We've seen him starting over Perez, who's been their captain for a long time and been a regular starter in that 9 jersey over Dupont.
And they've been reluctant to do that in the warm-up tournaments before this. So
or
clearly,
the World Series.
Yeah, that's it. In the warm-up tournaments. What am I on about? But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They've been reluctant to do that, rightfully so, because Perez has that jersey, and even if the best player in the world has come in, you have to work bloody hard to get that jersey off Perez because he's that good. However, clearly in the camps they've gone, Dupont is the guy for us, right? They've played a lot in past with Perez playing as the half-back and Dupont playing as the playmaker, kind of as in the 10 position, as it were. I think that actually really suits Dupont because he really thrives off broken field scenarios where he can just bat somebody off and then throw a pass or whatever. They're clearly a little bit reluctant to go into that straight away. They might be saving that back, but Perez, when he came on in that second game against Uruguay, 19-12 up, gets the winning turnover at the end, just really showed his experience. And again, like, that is what you would rave over if Dupont did it, but Perez has done it and it's exceptional. Speaking of the bullshit factor as well, Jordan Sefo absolutely has it. Jefferson Lee Joseph also has it, right? They have so many game breakers in this team, and yet they're nowhere near top form. They've not looked anywhere near their best. And you know that them squeaking through is all they need because you can never count them out.
Yeah, I think France have looked rusty. They've looked nervous. They've got an enormous, almost sold-out Stade de France behind them. And we've seen French teams lose that crowd numerous times in every version in every sport, never mind just rugby union. And so when they start to make some errors in that opening game against the USA, and they start to bottle it a bit, and the USA come back and draw level, and eventually kick the ball out in dramatic fashion to secure a draw, which puts them in prime position to finish as best third place team. We saw France start to wobble a bit, I think, and Uruguay I thought were fantastic against them the entire game and would have deserved that finish in a draw as well.
Uruguay, another team, fantastic on transition ball from either attack to defence or defence to attack. You know, the try they scored from the kickoff where they sprinted the distance. You know, it's just the epitome of how quickly a game of sevens can turn.
Absolutely. France, I think the true test of how they'll be, because they have qualified, they are through to the next round. However, they might be in as a third place draw, which would be significant, as a slip up because they'll end up playing an Argentina or a New Zealand, who they'll be looking, hopefully, to play in the final rounds in the semis and final rather than the quarters. So if they beat Fiji tomorrow, that's huge for them in terms of getting a better draw. But also, I think it shows us who they are because the pressure's off them a bit, right? Fiji have been so good today. Everyone knows Fiji Sevens' reputation. They're double gold champions. We have no pressure on them, no expectations. If France can go out there and beat them, or at least give them a really good game, push them really close, but preferably beat them, we can see if they're good enough to win this tournament. Yeah. Because at the minute, there's a little bit of like the emperor's got no clothes on about France. Like, they haven't quite been there, and Dupont was brilliant. Perez was fantastic. His winning moment against Uruguay when they had that scrum in the 22 to potentially win the game or draw the game. And his work on the turnover and pressuring and harrying the 9 was brilliant. And they have been bailed out by, it's not cricket, they've been bailed out by their big names a little bit. I think Rabaji's been very good, finished his try really nicely.
He's excellent.
But they haven't quite clicked together. And we'll see how they go, I think, against Fiji and get a better impression ahead of the quarterfinals that evening.
A long way to go for France, but sometimes you do find it with the best teams that they need a day like this, where it galvanises
the best thing for them is they've got an evening together where they can break off and go, okay, what went wrong? We've got a full morning tomorrow to put it right, and then we do it in the afternoon.
Yeah, 100%. So let's talk about the other teams in the pool quickly.
Yeah,
so again, Uruguay, right?
Superb.
Again, yeah, transition from defence to attack, fantastic. Ardao pulling the strings for them. I think he's been excellent, really good distributor of the ball, just a really good rugby brain. And I've really enjoyed watching him play. Echeverry as well, much the same.
Yeah.
And my boy out there, Baltazar Amatsa, fantastic.
Amatsa, superb player. Love watching him. Was brilliant at the World Cup.
Bonkers.
Diogo Ardao, I think, has been the standout for Uruguay.
Yeah.
But I do think they've been really good. I think they look like a team who aren't used to playing at this level, who've just thrown absolutely everything they have at it. And that absolutely wasn't enough against Fiji, because Fiji are Fiji. But against a team who are human in France, similar to what they did in the Rugby World Cup when they're playing, against France themselves, they brought them down to their level a little bit, and they're able to scrap and work and harry. The key characteristic of Uruguayan rugby for me, the key things are just working harder than anyone else.
Yeah.
And they played the Gaminard Derby first fixture against Fiji, and then that second game against France in particular, I think they just showed that they will work their socks off and they'll give everything.
Their scramble D is incredible as well.
Yeah. I thought they were superb. Yeah. And they aren't contenders for the title, but they have really added something to this tournament.
100%, couldn't agree more.
And the USA.
USA.
Weird one.
Yeah. USA are one of those funny ones that either they're absolute medal contenders or they're a little bit underwhelming.
Yeah.
And weirdly, we landed somewhere in the middle here, I think, which I guess maybe qualifies it as underwhelming. But the tries they've scored have been outstanding, right? Yeah. Lecamp hitting that line.
Lucas Lecamp, I think, has been phenomenal today. Attack and defence, effort levels, work rate and accuracy of everything he does.
There's not a bad area of his game, right? In sevens, if one of your kind of assets isn't up to world-class standard, you get found out quickly. Yeah. And I think he's an all-rounder.
Yeah. I think the USA at their best look like they can challenge for a medal.
Yeah.
However, they are at their best far less than you'd want them to be. Yeah. And I'll be really interested to see how they go in the coming next couple of days. They've got a game against Uruguay, which should, if they win that, they're in the quarterfinals, they're through. If they lose that, then they're entirely reliant on luck of the draw, but it looks like they're probably out if they don't.
A Matza versus Speed Stick in that game. Perry Baker, who's maybe not as quick as he once was. He's 37 now.
No, I tweeted this, right? He is 8 months younger than Alan Wynne-Jones.
That's mental. That's genuinely mad. He's not quite as quick as he used to be.
And almost as quick.
Which was absolutely insanely quick, right? His agility isn't quite as good as maybe some of the highlights, real clips of him, but he can still swerve, man. He's adapted his game properly, and he's a proper sevens winger, and he's still got it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's hard to say much about the USA because they're in a weird state. It's hard to know how good they are. As I say, I think we have seen enough to say if they finished third, if they got the bronze medal, I wouldn't be that surprised. I wouldn't be that upset. But at the minute, they don't look the third best team in the tournament.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that they might be about to enter that phase that I'm on about with Kenya. Yeah. With Madison Hughes is getting on, Perry Baker's getting on. I think Thomasin's been around a long time. They've got a lot of players in that squad who are at the tail end of their sevens careers. So we'll see how they go. But yeah, unfortunately, not looking like medal contenders at the moment.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the younger players have stood up really nicely.
Oh, 100%.
And there is something going on here. And yeah, we'll see if they're still involved come Mike Saturday and whether they're hanging around there. Because I think if they are, they can cause an upset. But yeah, I think it would be an upset if they do something, but I think they're capable of it.
Sure.
So let's finally move on to the final group of teams. We have New Zealand at the head of this, who have been hugely impressive, I think.
Yeah, they are looking on fire. Again, you always expect this with New Zealand Sevens teams, that their speed and attack is always just next level. Yeah. And that they have 7 players with fly half level vision, and again, it's what I was just saying about all-rounders, right? That their 9s and 10s are as strong as a lot of their forwards are.
Yeah.
Their forwards are as strong as their wingers are, right? You often look at New Zealand and you can't quite tell who's playing what position. When you see Lewis Ormond skimming somebody and going, wait, that's the fat lad. Unbelievable. I was really shocked in the second game when Rokolisoa came on at 9. Yeah. I was like, wait, you're telling me he's not been playing on the wing the whole time?
So we went to watch the Touch World Cup last week, right? And watching the New Zealand mixed team play against the USA, And they tore them up. And the USA team looked good. They were playing really well. And New Zealand just tore them up like it was a completely different game.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of that vibe watching them here, you know, of they have trained for this fast at the game and their core skills are just so good in every area. And it sounds like a boring thing to say about New Zealand team because everyone says it about every team.
It's such a boomer thing to say, isn't it?
But it is true.
There is truth to it.
And when you see them score those tries like they did against Japan, right?
Yeah.
Where so much of it is simple passes delivered perfectly timed and just having the core skills to nail everything, it's beautiful to watch and it's simple, you know? And they tried against South Africa. Two of them are two of the best tries we'll see all weekend, you know, the first one in particular. And yet, it is not fancy, flashy rugby that no one else can play, you know? If you were really good and drilled from the age of 5, you could do this to this level as well.
And again, like their work of the breakdown is one thing that's massive. You know, it's their physicality. Also, apologies, I meant Dylan Collier, not Lewis Ormond. Got my New Zealand Sevens legends and captains mixed up. But again, like once again, going back to what we're saying about Argentina, like the players they're bringing off the bench they're not just worse versions of the players they're starting. Yeah. They've just got a consistent level that they expect throughout their squad. You know, that you've got the likes of Regan Ware, who's really been around the block coming off the bench. Yeah. You've got the likes of Scott Curry, who's maybe putting in like 6-7 minute shifts and then taking a rest. You know, they've clearly got a real kind of rhythm to the way that they're trying to play. Yeah. And yeah, they're really consistent from the first minute to the 14th.
And this is the only major competition they're eligible for that New Zealand have never won in rugby, which is absurd. They've won countless World Cups, rugby championships, everything out, us under-20s. They've never won the Olympic gold medal.
And our friend on comms, Claire Thomas, said, like, New Zealand Republic hate that, right? Because they have such exceptionally high standards for what their rugby team should be achieving at all times. And so they should, you know? And they are real contenders, man. And if you're coming up against them in the final, I would so not bet against them. No. They are currently, if you looked at the bookies' favourites going into this, they were 4th. Okay. And yet I wouldn't rule them out, right? If you put them in a semi-final against basically any of those teams, I'd probably back them. Yeah. You know? I think France had the home field advantage. They click, they could be good. And Argentina and Fiji look extremely good. And yet, you know, we'll see. I'm really excited to see them continue playing. They're just so clean and polished and shiny and good. Like, the key word to describe them is good. And it sounds like faint praise because it is, but I don't mean it as such. I know what you mean, though. They're just polished, aren't they? Yeah. There's not a bad area to their game. Yeah. And how do you get through them? How do you stop them? Yeah. Who knows? The 4 best teams in 15-a-side rugby are all in the same pool in New Zealand, Ireland, South Africa and Japan. So let's move on to Ireland. We've touched them a little bit throughout this. The really interesting about them is how differently they play the game, you know? And their coach, James Topping, talked about, and this is something that came up in Claire's commentary. Hi, Claire, if you're watching. I doubt you made it this far in the video, even if you are. Keep up the great work. I don't know how you have so much time. Wonderful work as ever. Topping has talked about how he knows his team aren't Fiji and aren't New Zealand, so they have to play a different way. Yeah. And so they play a far more possession-based game. Very similar to the way Andy Farrell's 15-side Ireland play. They're not afraid to take tackles. You know, a lot of teams are much more, you know, take a step back when you're close to contact. Yeah. Or put your fend out, try and free an arm, throw a 50-50. They're not afraid to recycle the ball. You know, they put a lot of weight on their backs being able to secure rucks just as well as their forwards, which I know is always the case in sevens. But you look at, you know, you touched upon Hugo Keenan coming in there. Like a lot of, you know, the second Hugo in their team. Indeed. Players like him out wide who are just extremely comfortable in contact scenarios and aren't trying to avoid those sorts of things. I think, go on. No, you look at their opening try against Japan, where you've got the scrum half picking up and scooting one round. Was it Kelly? No, it was just Big Terry, wasn't it? Terry Kennedy. Big Tez Ken, yeah. The stupidest name that you can name a brilliant, exciting rugby player, because no one could get excited shouting, "Go on, Terry Kennedy." You know, like, go on, my Uncle Pete. You might as well be shouting. The thing is, I was about to say, the point on the bullshit factor, maybe the player in the tournament who's shown that the most is Terry Kennedy. Yeah. That he'll get the ball like twice and a half and both times he'll sprint the length. Yeah. He's ridiculously good. You say that and I'm like, oh, is he round to like fix my radio? Terry Kennedy. I can't take a world-class player. Like, Will Jordan's boring as a name.
but like you can get behind it, you know? Where Terry Kennedy is a world-class athlete who I'm thrilled by watching. I just can't process it. I can't process being so excited by watching a man called Terry Kennedy play sport. It doesn't make any sense to me, but he's been phenomenal.
It's the world we live in, man. Yeah.
And it's been one of those great things, right? Where he is the big star name in this team alongside Jordan Conroy.
Yeah.
And he has stepped up at the biggest stage. And it's the first time Ireland gone into one of these tournaments really as contenders. You know, they did incredibly well in 2020, but I think that surprised a lot of people. This time they have been a consistently good sevens team for a long time.
Yeah.
And they're going in as a team that people would put in medaling positions when they're discussing who it could be, who could be coming in.
Go on.
And no, but so to see their big names in Conroy and Kennedy step up and be superb is really pleasing for them.
And again, like Conroy, we've not seen it near his best yet.
No.
Like there's going to be more from him in this tournament. He's going to be scoring tries. We know
he does something every time he gets the ball.
Yeah.
You know, he does something with it.
And like chasing kicks, kickoffs, and so on. Like and defensively, he does so much.
Yeah.
He works so hard.
His team are always in a better place whenever he's involved.
100%. Yeah, that's 100% it. As I say, Kennedy has maybe the biggest bullshit factor in the tournament. The thing is, we have an annoying head start that we know what Dupont's capable of a bit more than the rest of the players in this tournament. However, Kennedy, as I say, like both those tries in the second game that he was directly involved in, it's his sprinting, it's his strength, it's just his awareness of space. He's just so quick into that space, right? But I think the foil for him, it comes up front in the form of Harry McNulty is absolutely incredible.
Really good.
Defensively, like over the ball, set piece and everything, doesn't do anything wrong. And Zach Ward has really, really impressed me.
Worked his socks off.
He absolutely has. And from what we were saying about Ravin Tamanda, somebody who is worth 5 more metres on his carry than he should be worth. You know, he's so strong. He's like a kind of Jack Conan style number 8 in 15s, except translated to a game where you have to be absolute like a sprinter, you know, all the time. So impressed by them across the board. I can't really find a weak link in their team.
That's it, isn't it? And you wonder whether they'll come down to the same thing as our 15 team, where there's no weak links and yet they don't quite have the kind of kapumph to win a knockout game. That's less relevant in sevens.
The thing is, they've got Kennedy, man.
7 minutes.
They've got Kennedy. Anything can happen.
However, you've got to look at them. It's so hard to pick who wins this from here.
It is.
But I think they're real contenders.
100% they are.
Speaking of a team who perhaps might not be contenders, but are looking pretty good for a quarterfinal spot, South Africa.
Yeah.
So, the Blitzbok, as they're known, have perhaps gone through a bit of a downturn last few years, the post-South Africa era. Snuck into this team as the last qualifier, beat Team GB for that last spot, and I think they've looked pretty good for it. I think they've been good across the board here, and obviously the games haven't necessarily gone their way. They've lost both games, but they've given 2 of the tournament contenders good games for a young team that's still developing, and I would be quietly confident if I was South African going into the game against Japan and knowing that can, if they win it, put them into a quarterfinal.
They are the darkest of dark horses here.
Yes.
I think they're the most unpredictable team for what on earth they could pull out. I have no idea. I can't gauge like on a scale how close to their ceiling they are, right? And when you look at, if I were to like say like who stood out for South Africa, I kind of go like, well, I guess it's Zane Davids, I guess it's Roscoe Speckman, I guess it's kind of the names that you expect to do well for them. Tristan Lades, like it's kind of the players who are usually quite.
Actually.
Yeah, that's true, or 50 of them. There's only 2 in the squad. I don't know why I'm saying that, but my point is that I don't know where they're at, right? And that kind of scares me.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like they could pull something out the bag and they could just be saving something back. And I might be going off, you know, in past Olympics, when they've got to the knockouts, they've kind of done like a Springbok 15 style thing.
Yeah.
And like shut shit down. Like they've defended really well. They've chased kicks and stuff. And they've just got all of the like nuts and bolts right. And I feel like that's something they could be capable of. But I don't know if I'm just traumatised by South African rugby teams just being brilliant.
That's it though. So the way that it's standing at the minute for the knockouts, Argentina, Australia, Fiji, New Zealand, Ireland and France have all qualified. We are still waiting on then 2 spots to go through. So the USA go through if they beat Uruguay. If they don't, they're good as dead and buried. They'll finish on 4 points. And whoever wins between Samoa and Kenya and Japan and South Africa, the winner of each of those games will finish on 5 points. So they'll knock the USA out unless it's a draw, in which case the USA can still go through. And it then comes down to points difference between those two teams. So say South Africa are to beat Japan tomorrow, which you'd say is probably the favoured result.
Yeah.
Their points difference is -17. They have the best points difference of any of those 4 teams. Japan have the worst. Kenya and Samoa are 10 points apart. Samoa on -23, Kenya on -33. So Kenya would need to beat Samoa by 6 points or more to go above them.
Oh, I love it when it's not like an unrealistic target.
Yeah. But no.
Could hang on a conversion at the end.
No, they'd need more than that, wouldn't they? Depending on South Africa's result.
Okay.
So, yeah, South Africa, they would need to win by, 14 points more than South Africa.
More than South Africa, yeah.
So that becomes a difficult thing, right? However, if Japan beats South Africa, which isn't impossible, suddenly that opens up the other side of the draw. But we're looking at South Africa and USA probably being the other 2 qualifiers. And probably going for South Africa probably going for the bottom seed, USA is second bottom seed, who would play the top seed, who likely to be Argentina and New Zealand.
Yeah. So, again, if they get to that stage, who knows what they could do. You know, they're a team that I could see them coming up against a much better team and still giving them a hard time, you know, if today's anything to go by.
So, that brings us through all of the teams. We thought we were going to do this in 20 minutes. It's taken us 50. But thank you for watching this. Our plan is we're going to do this again on the Sunday. We want to do it for every day. That isn't going to be possible. We're going to cover the finals day, which is Saturday. And then we're going to try and cover, in this way, all of the women's tournament. So all 3 days of the women's tournament, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday.
Because we're woke like that.
Yeah. There's been no clips inserted, partly because the Olympics are really stingy on clips and taking stuff down. And we learned our lesson. And partly just because we want to get this up.
Take a long time to edit.
It would take such a long time. So all we've done is cut out the bits where I coughed.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I want to say thank you for watching. I want to say thank you for rugby. And thank Billy 12 Trees for being the best centre England have ever had.
I 100% agree. And it's good night from me, and it's good night from Antoine.
We didn't do moment of the day. Do you want to do moment of the day?
Nah.
Fair enough. That's fine.
Leave that in.
Let's leave that in.